So what I'm going to show you today, this won't take too long, is actually how to do a split screen. Now there's a couple different ways to do split screen, but I'm going to show you the way that we do it in Final Cut Pro. I'm also going to show you a couple little special things you can do with a split screen. You know, kind of fancy stuff, which will actually teach you all a second technique, which is called Keyframe Animating in Final Cut Pro. And there's a lot of things you can keyframe animate. You don't have to do just the split screens. Just about any effect or filter in Final Cut Pro can be keyframed. I'll show you a couple other examples of that actually when we get to probably next week or a week after that. I'm going to show you how to keyframe animate colors, which are kind of cool. So you can actually literally shift from one color to the next. It's really kind of fun. But anyway, so I'm just going to choose two clips here. Yeah, the over-the-shoulder shot was a good one, and there was another one, let's see, yes. So I'm going to drop this one down first, and you can kind of see it looks good there, and then go to that over-the-shoulder shot here. Okay, so the idea here is that what I want to do is I want to show an over-the-shoulder shot that is why is Final Cut Pro annoying me? Okay, I want to show the over-the-shoulder shot at the same time that I'm showing the photograph of, or the shot of you sitting there in your chair reading the book. So I'm going to do two at once. Now, some of you may or may not do this, but it's still a good technique to learn. The important thing here is I need to kind of look at my shot and decide which side of the frame each one's going to be on. Because realize when you do a split frame, only half of your footage or half of your frame is going to be able to be visible on either side. So I need to kind of make a strategic, kind of a strategic plan here about which one's going to be which. If I look at the shot here where Lorenzo's sitting and everybody else is sitting on the right, I have to make a decision what's more important, Lorenzo or everybody else. And in this case, it's definitely Lorenzo because he's my main subject, and in the right side, or on the right side will be him reading the book. So if I don't show that, that would be weird. If I don't show him over here, we would have no context for what this shot means. Whereas here we see him reading the book, here we see the over-the-shoulder shot. Now we've got context, we understand what's actually going on. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take this clip and I'm going to drop it right down over top of the other clip. And that's actually really important. You have to have the two clips one on top of the other. The other thing that you can do, if you don't want to drag it, is you can actually zoom in here and you can right click and say add track. And that will automatically add the second track, and then you can drag the clip into it. But you don't need to do that. You can just drag the clip right down and put it in the space above. You can see that it already tells me it's going to add a track, and done. So now obviously they need to be the same length too. So I'm going to trim this one back and snap that one to the end of the first track. And now I've got my two tracks here that I'm going to make a split screen. The first way that you can make a split screen, or the easiest way, is actually to use a garbage matte. Now, I don't have to just do that, but it's going to be rather important, and I'll show you why in this case. But I could just move it over. So if you double click on your clip and you go up to the motion tab here, okay, and click on it, you'll see right here there's a center button. And you can press that, or you can type in the different coordinates. Now here's how it works. Let's go and look at our frame. Directly in the middle is 0 and 0, both on the X and Y coordinates. Since standard definition video is 480 pixels tall, okay, and our zero's in the middle, that means we have 240 pixels up, 240 pixels down. The math is really simple. So if I wanted to move it down to here, my center point would be at negative 240. If I wanted to move my center point up, it would be positive 240, right? Width-wise, it does the same thing. Standard definition video is 720 pixels wide. So we have 360 positive or 360 negative. So I can just move this over to create a split screen, and I just take my center here and move it over to 360. Oops, wrong one. Sorry, that's the vertical. Here, move it 360. And what that does is, you can see in our video screen here, that creates a split screen. However, it's not the best, right? Because we can't see the book. So the purpose of the split screen is a little mystical here, okay? We can't really understand what he's doing. We see him reading a book here, but we don't see the book here. And if our focus is the book itself, which it kind of was in that shot, we've got something we need to do. So I'm actually going to put it back to 0 and show you another technique. If I've got my stuff already over on the right side, and I want to make this left half and cut it out, crop it basically, I can do so very easily. Now there's a crop menu here, which you can do that with. So I can just go left and I can crop it. These numbers, by the way, are in percentages. So I can crop it to 50%. And now you can see that I can now see the book. The problem is, there's a lot of wasted space here. I don't like that wasted space. So what I'm actually going to do is I can back it off a little bit, and then I could also move my center. But the problem with that is, because the crop is in percentages, it gets a little difficult to do it exactly in the middle. Right? So if I move it over 40 pixels, I have to figure out what percentage of 480 is 40 pixels, and then change my crop by that amount. I don't like that. Actually, you know what? I could be wrong about that. Let me try something here. So let's move it over, let's say, 90 pixels. Yeah, see, the crop goes 50%, but it's not 50% of the whole frame. It's 50% of that clip. So then I'd have to kind of back away until I thought that I was halfway there, which could be very difficult. I might be a little over, a little under really easily and not know what I was doing. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go and I'm going to add what we call a garbage matte to it. And a garbage matte is essentially a mask. And a mask is a transparency setting. So if I go to a 4-point garbage matte, I'm just going to take that and drag that to my clip. And what that does, you can see over here, it gives me 4 points. Let me set this back to 0. 1, 2, 3, and 4, each for the corners of my image. If I move one of these points over, it's going to cut out the rest. So just watch. I can go over here, go to my filters. There's point number 1. I'm just going to click the plus, and you can see there's a little red plus right there. And now I can move number 1 over. See that? Pretty cool, huh? That's pretty cool. So what I can do now is, well, we want this to stay at 240. So that's negative 240. We want that to stay at the same. But I can move this negative 50, or no, half of 360. Or no, sorry, 360 is half of 720. So if I moved it to 0, now number 1 is going to be right in the middle. See that? And number 4, I do the same thing. Now I've got my middle. Same problem I had before. I've got too much space on the right. I want to see a little bit more of the arm and the book and stuff like that. So what I can do now is I'm going to go to my Motion tab, take my center, and I'm just going to start moving it over. Let's try 50 first. Nah, we still have plenty of room to play with. How about 80? Nah, we still got more. 90? Getting there. About 100. There we go. Now the corner of the book is just touching the corner of the frame. So now I've got 100 more pixels that I can play with over here in the center. And because I know exactly how many pixels I've got, I can go to my filter and just move the mask back 100 pixels. So I go minus 100, minus 100. The math isn't that complicated. It's more about just keeping your head in the game as far as understanding which way you've moved the frame. But now you can see that this already looks a lot better. And let's just make it bigger here. You also should notice that down here on the timeline, it's red. So I've got to render everything. So Command R for rendering. Yeah, whatever. I haven't saved this project. Doesn't take long to render this. You know, it's not that hard of a deal for the computer to do. But once it's done, we can play it in real time. So there we go. And it's not playing. How about that? It's thinking. One of the biggest things that you really have to worry about when you do something like this, honestly, is timing. Timing is a big deal. If the two clips are not timed, the actions that are inside the two clips are not timed correctly, it can look a little weird, as it's going to whenever it decides to actually play the video. Because what you'll end up seeing is Lorenzo actually gets up and gets up out of the chair and walks away from the chair, but in the right side of the frame, he's still reading the book. That could look a little weird, unless the whole purpose of this is to show two different timelines, which is part of your assignment, see? So this could be a really great way of showing, see, here we go, of showing that he's in one timeline decides to get up out of his chair, and in the other timeline decides to keep on reading his book. See, so he's not even turning the pages at the same time. So little details like that could really be a problem depending upon what the meaning of the movie is. So you have to be very careful about that, okay? Timing is really important. But I think here it shows a pretty good idea of two separate timelines. Now, somebody asked before, what if I want to put a black bar in between so that there's a little separation between the two shots? That makes total sense to me. That really does. And it's actually pretty simple. Let's take our 4-point garbage mat and we're going to drag another one down to the bottom frame here. So now we've also got a 4-point garbage mat on the bottom frame. Now what we're going to do is we're going to do the opposite. We're going to double click on it and we're going to change point 3 or point 2 and point 3 are going to come in to 0 here. So 0 and 0. Now what's going to happen is if I turn off number 1, you'll see that I've cut out the right side of the frame on the first layer of footage here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to move it over 5 more pixels. -5. Oops. -5. So what I did is I just moved it over to the left a little bit more. Then I'm going to go back to my top one, and I'm going to move that over 5. So here, we'll go -95. See, that moves that over a little bit, and then -95 again. And that just gives me a 10-pixel black border. Why is it black? Because there's no video there. And so when there's nothing showing, Final Cut Pro puts black in behind it. Voila, nice and simple, okay? So now I've got a nice little black bar between the two. Notice I need to re-render everything. And also notice it's going to take a little longer because now I'm rendering 2 sets of video, 2 tracks, instead of just 1. But once it's finished, we can play it, and you'll see how it looks, which I think is, pretty respectable. Let's make this little, well, we can't make it any bigger. All right. That little black bar down the middle, I think, does a lot, actually, for adding a buffer zone for the 2 clips. It's kind of nice. Let's do one more thing. Let's just say I wanted to start full frame, and I wanted to dissolve into a chopped frame or a split frame like this, okay? There's a couple different ways you can do it. I'm going to show you how we're going to slide the points over to make it kind of a cool transition. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here. I'm going to double click on my number 1, the top layer film, and I'm going to go in here, and if you notice, we've got these little triangle diamond marks here. These are keyframes. Keyframes are basically markers where you say, I want this setting and I want this setting to appear now. Okay, so they're time-based, but they remember basically your settings. So watch this. I'm going to click them. Okay, right here at the time that we're at. So we're at about 8 seconds. Okay? Now I'm going to go back a little bit. And you can do this on the timeline here too. Notice that they're linked together. The playhead down here also controls the playhead up here, which is good. So we're going to go about 4 seconds back or so, and I can move these later. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back in and I'm going to create 4 new keyframes. And then now I'm going to replace my -95 with -360, which is the way it was originally set to. So now look what happens. I got to re-render. But because I have keyframe 1 here is at -360, then keyframe 2 takes it basically to the middle, which I think was what, -95, right? It's going to then animate the difference between the two, which is really cool. Now, keyframe on points 2 and 3 don't change, so those 2 points aren't going to change, but watch. See how it's slowly pulling those over? Pretty cool. But we've got a problem, don't we? Because here at the beginning, the frame is offset, so we can see the background plate, or the background video footage. So I need to move this back over. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go back to my original keyframe, go back to the Motion tab, and make a keyframe here for my center point. Boom. Okay, it's right there. And remember, the playheads are tied together, which is really nice. So then I'll go back to the original keyframe where it's supposed to start, go back to my Motion, make another keyframe, and then set this back to 0. Now, it not only is going to animate points 1 and 4, but it's also going to animate the center of the clip. So it's going to slide over, which could look a little weird, you know, I mean, depending. Let's see what happens. Let's see how it looks. Once it's done rendering, of course. The new version of Final Cut Pro, by the way, does background rendering, so you almost never have to render stuff right away. It's pretty cool. Kind of does it always. If I had an argument, I'd say it's too long. It needs to be faster. So what I can do here is I can say, you know what, I want it to be right about, you know, take a little bit less time. Snapping is on, it's driving me nuts. Turn snapping off for a second. Figure out where I want it to start. Then I'll turn snapping back on, and now all I have to do is just bring my keyframes over. So just drag that keyframe over, go back to my filters here, drag all these keyframes over. They just snap straight to the playhead right here. Re-render again, and check my timing. Honestly, the worst part about this whole process is the rendering, right? You have to render every time you change something. So I highly recommend you do stuff like this, get it set, figure it out, and then leave it alone. Because if you start changing things, it starts you have to re-render every time, and it does get a little frustrating. So let's take a look at how that looks. That's a lot better. That's a lot better. You see? So there's something very simple that you can do in Final Cut Pro to create a split screen. There are all sorts of other things you can play with, like feathering and all that other stuff, which I'll let you just kind of play with. Yeah, question?
Would you be able to do like a clip of half the screen black and then starting with one clip and then the other clip comes in?
Oh yeah, absolutely. That would be really easy. So let's say we wanted to do that. Let's get rid of our keyframes here. So I'm going to go to my keyframes and I'm going to get rid of them just by clicking them like that. So we're going to stay like normal. Okay, so let me get rid of this keyframe here. Get rid of it, then go to the next keyframe, get rid of it. Okay, so now we're back to the way we were without an animation. So we've just got a regular split screen. If we wanted, say, the bottom one to fade in or the top one to fade in, absolutely. All you've got to do is just add your normal transitions on it. So that's an excellent question. So I'm just going to do a nice fade in. So I'm going to take this, I'll fade in on this one. Okay, I can drag it to be a little longer. Again, we have to render. okay, because we undid all those keyframes. But see, it renders a little faster here because we're not animating anything. Now notice the second clip will come in. The other thing you could do with keyframes is you could even do a dissolve where, well, here I'll show you. So this one, here we go, and now it's going to fade in. Nice and simple, okay? If you wanted to do something more complicated where, let's say you wanted this to be a full screen and you wanted it to fade in to a half screen, I'm pretty sure, let's see here, I'm just going by the, yeah, you'd have to work on it a little bit more. We'd have to probably do 3 layers, but we could do that. But anyway, you'd have to work a little harder to get that, the right one, the fade in from, you know, go from full to half as a fade. But we could do it. It would just take another layer. I don't want to get into it right now, but if you think about it, you might be able to figure it out on your own. Just put a 3rd layer up top here that matches the 2nd layer, and then you dissolve it out, right? And then what will happen is it'll fade out. You'll have the same video clip underneath, so it looks like this half doesn't go anywhere, but then it fades to this half. You could definitely do that. Your major problem with that would be the fact that we've moved this half over to the right, and so you wouldn't have enough footage here. Whenever you move video over, you get into really big problems. And let me just say, as a thing, some people will like to try and scale video up to give it more, you know, zoom in on it so it has more coverage, but that degrades the quality of the video dramatically. It's not a good idea to crop in, especially on standard definition video. I've done it a couple of times where I've been working in high def, and I'll work with 1080p signals, and if I have to crop, I'll work with a 720 project, so I have all those extra pixels, and then if I need to zoom in, I can, and you don't see any loss of quality. But that's very rare. I don't like doing that. I use the shots the way they were shot as much as possible, just because it starts to look really ugly when you zoom in on stuff. Good question, though, about the fade in, fade outs. Yeah, you can do all sorts of stuff. You could have multiple clips running under this one, while this one's running over top of them all. So you could have 3 or 4 clips changing here and not have a problem. You could also have 3 or 4 clips changing on top as well and not have a problem. It's all dependent upon what you would want to do, you know? The order that they're in could change that, you know? So whichever one's on top ends up being somewhat of a dominant force in the editing because it's the one that all the others have to kind of deal with. Whereas if there's a clip on the bottom, you don't have to worry about it so much because you can just layer stuff on top of it and it's fine. Okay, so choosing which video clip is on top is a strategic decision that can really go well or go very poorly if you're not careful. Any other questions? Okay.